Welcome to Practically Christian. I'm Luke, and I'm here with my wife Janelle.
Hi guys.
And my friend Jake.
Hey.
We share conversations that help you know Jesus more deeply and follow him more faithfully. The truth is, no one has arrived at Christ-likeness. To grow in that direction, we believe you need authentic relationships and biblical theology applied to your everyday life. We hope that you're encouraged to grow and to live out the biblical truths that we discuss on this episode. So let's get practical and dive into a continuing conversation about faith and film and the movie Scott Pilgrim versus the World.
2010.
All right, welcome back. In this series, we're looking at faith and film, theology, and kind of putting together an analysis of our favorite movies and films, and then also using that as a jumping off place to talk about the theological topics and ideas that those films raise. And our hope is not only to get you interested in some of our favorite movies, but our bigger hope is that all of us will grow in the skill of not separating out Christianity from the rest of life. Like Christianity is supposed to be all about all of life, and it's a skill that we all can grow in and should seek to grow in as followers of Jesus, to analyze the stories we read, even when and especially when they're not explicitly Christian stories, to analyze them in light of our faith and the big themes of the gospel. So
stories we watch too, not just the stories we read.
Yeah, sorry, stories we read and the movies we watch. Thank you, Jill. Yeah. So for this, these two episodes, we're gonna have a two-part series on the movie Scott Pilgrim versus the World. For those of you unfamiliar with it, Jake, you picked this one. So first of all, before we even get into a summary, why did you pick this movie to go through for us?
Yeah, well, and I guess, okay, before that even, there is a disclaimer on this movie, meaning it is not appropriate for children. There are a few inappropriate parts. It's not a Christian film, and so after we talk about this, don't be like, wow, I'm going to watch this with my middle schooler. It's probably not going to go super hot. But it's an appropriate movie for adults, and for potentially like kids like junior, senior year of high school, depending on what your maturity is. Yeah. So anyway, Scott Pilgrim versus the World is about this guy named Scott Pilgrim, which is just Michael Cena playing himself. And he is, that's a joke because it's a very awkward character. And it's him, he falls in love with this girl named Ramona Flowers, basically from having a dream about her and then seeing her one time. And it's his story of like breaking up with his old girlfriend who was a high schooler. He's 22. And having to fight her 7 evil exes, Ramona's 7 evil ex-boyfriends, or several 7 evil exes, to basically like win her heart, in essence. It's kind of a weird film. It's an indie film, so actually the like filming is really cool, the cinematography is really cool, but it's still a weird movie all the way through.
They basically integrate comic book style scenes and even graphics and things.
Yes.
With regular filming, so it's very artistic.
Yeah, it's very artistic. It's not for everybody, but I think the story is really interesting as it is kind of like this allegory for how you have to kind of get rid of your baggage or deal with the other person's like history in a relationship. And so he has to defeat in combat all of the 7 evil exes through different ways and functions, and basically continue to pursue Ramona through that process, while at the same time kind of dealing with some of his own baggage along the way.
Yeah, and I'll just be honest and say, like, Jake talked up this movie for years, and then Janelle and I watch it, and we're like, this is weird. And then, you probably explained this beforehand, but I did not go into the movie with the perspective of he's not fighting the literal exes, he's fighting Ramona's baggage about her exes.
Yeah.
And when you actually like think of the movie with that in line, it does make a lot more sense.
It's a lot better of a movie once you like think about like what's actually going on, or else it's like the most incoherent movie of all time if you think that everything is actually happening.
Yeah, I mean it's just kind of goofy.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
Just silly and disconnected. But I do think in real relationships you are taking the other person's baggage on in a sense, and like you're
having to deal with it.
Yeah. It also, the funniest thing about it is like the cast is like super star-studded. If you like, it's got Michael Cera, it's got Chris Evans, who's Captain America. It's got Brie Larson before Captain Marvel. It's got Amy Adams, who's from what is that? This show that's kind of like The Office, about the National Park Service, or
Oh,
like the state park or whatever. It's
Parks and
Parks and
Parks and Rec. Yeah, Amy Adams from Parks and Rec is in there.
Mm.
And there's like a bunch of other people too. Like it's like a very famous cast of people. And the funny thing about it is a lot of those people, the reason they're in the movie is because they like the comic. And it's a little bit
Interesting.
of like a labor of love kind of
Mm.
movie.
That's kind
Um,
of cool.
but there's a lot of cameos.
Yeah. So you get kind of give a summary of the film. First question is, what is the funniest part of the movie for you and why?
So mine isn't a specific moment, but I think the funniness of it is he's like an anti-hero in some sense. Like he's like this nerdy guy who is kind of floundering in his love life
And just life in general.
and life in general. And then that's like juxtaposed with him being like essentially like a comic book hero, like bam, bam, shabam, I defeated this evil villain. You know, like so it's like I think that the just the general juxtaposition of nerdy, floundering young adults and who would probably be into things like comic books and whatnot, and then like the experience of him being the fighter.
Yeah. What about you, Jake?
So
The
there's like a
funniest part.
lot of parts that I think are really funny. Um, I think one of them that is when he's fighting the third evil ex, the guy who's a vegan, and he
Yeah.
has his vegan, like he's got psychic powers because he's a vegan. So he's like Scott's like losing this battle, and then he like gets thrown into a room where he like makes coffee really quick, and he puts soy milk in one of them, and he puts cream in the other to basically the goal of like if this guy drinks the real milk, then he'll lose his vegan powers, right?
Yeah.
And so he does this, and he's like, "Here, I made you coffee." Like in the middle of the fight, as he's like on the ground, like all like beat up, and he's like. I'm a psychic. I know that you put the creamer in that one and the soy in the other one. And he takes the other one and then he drinks it, and Scott goes, actually, I put real milk in that one, but I thought real hard about putting soy in that one. and then and so then he drinks this, and the vegan police show up, which are like these guys who like they like come through a wall, they have like laser guns, and they're like they come over and they're like, hey, you've got your 3 strikes on veganism, your vegan powers are gonna get taken away. And he's like, what? 3 strikes? And they're like, you had a chicken parm. He's like, chicken's not vegan? And they take away his powers. But the best part about this whole thing is like this is how Scott's able to beat him. But they take away his powers. But then in the background, they like these two like vegan police are like running away. But like they jump over a wall, and as they jump, they high five each other and go yeah. And then they get in their like space car and leave.
So
And you're just
ridiculous.
like. It's like one of those things that's happening in the background. It's just like hilarious. Like,
Yeah.
why in the world is this going on?
Oh man. Yeah. And if you haven't seen the movie, picture that.
But it's the whole
But
movie.
the movie is like that. Yeah. Um yeah, the funniest part of the movie for me, I don't have a particular scene or moment, but I think just the dialogue in general is like cheesy, uh, cringy, like um kind of going back to what you said, Janelle, where like just some of the things Scott says are like that's not the kind of thing you would expect the protagonist or hero
Mhm.
of a story to say. It's just like, yeah,
Yeah. I
it
appreciate the
is
other
weird.
part of it is like it's very like a lot of the lines are very funny, but they're not like funny in the way that like a sitcom is funny where you're like this is written for a comedy skit. It's like they're funny because like sometimes they're like so accurate to how like someone would actually stumble over words
Mhm.
in a situation
Yeah,
where he's like it's awkward, but it's awkward because it's like in some spaces like realish dialogue.
yeah,
And you're like, "Oh, that's why they don't do that in movies."
mhm, yeah. So, the main storyline is that Scott is interested in this girl, but like to win her, he has to battle her exes. And again, if you get that, he's not literally battling her exes, he's battling the emotional baggage she has from them. Um, and before you even go to like the theological level, I think there is like truth to this. If you date someone, or if you do the courting thing, if you court someone, like we all carry with us emotional baggage from previous relationships, um, into to future ones. So, next question is, how does this reflect the real challenges of dating someone with a past? And it could be about yourself or people you know. Yeah.
I mean, I would expand it. I don't think it's just the baggage people carry isn't just their dating baggage when
Mhm.
they come into a dating relationship. Like any hard things they've gone through, if they had a really unhealthy relationship with one of their parents, for instance, like
Mhm.
that's baggage they're going to carry into the relationship. And you,
Sure.
as the new potential spouse that is being vetted in the dating courting process, like you are coming up against their wounds in various ways. And I think it's just true
Mhm.
that that's how it looks. I think one thing that maybe doesn't totally reflect reality in the film is that he is able to defeat like one symbolic
Mhm.
ex and then it's over. And I think in our real relationships, that baggage isn't always just a one and
Mhm.
done, like, oh, I realized that I am interpreting you this way because of, an experience I had in the past.
Yeah.
And then now that I know that, I've defeated it and I'm done. Like, that's just not how we work. It's a lot more integrated and a lot more like healing takes time and it takes various
Mhm.
avenues and not just a one time confrontation. But of course, you can't reflect that in a
Mhm.
in a compelling
Yeah.
comic book hero style.
Yeah. I mean, connecting to real life, like how in real life, how does it work? Like, how do you battle against people's pasts if you're in a dating relationship?
Yeah, I think there's like some similarities and some differences. I think obviously oftentimes it's a longer thing, or like and I think one of the things is like even in like even if you take like dating or like romantic things, there's also like baggage. And the movie kind of touches on this in the background a little bit, where like Scott has given people some baggage by flirting with them and then not dating them. And like even that's kind of like some emotional baggage that he's given to other people, that is not like explored very much, but kind of like in some ways shows that he's like not the best awesome guy the whole time, right? Um, but I think there's like it's like small moments and small things, but often there is like a big connector. And I think the movie is trying to get across this idea of like um you have like in some sense you can have an idyllic view
Hmm.
of some things about your past, and it's not until either that idyllic view is broken or until you kind of like choose the new person over your idealism over someone else, right? I think it's a lot of times when there's like unhealthy relationships, where there's like a lot of like up and down in the relationship, where like people can go like, oh my gosh, this new relationship I'm in, it's good, but there's not enough passion. And there is a point at which those people have to go, that's not like passion and fight, like oscillation is not like actually a healthy relationship. And sometimes that like real like yes, there's like a lot of like the fighting in there, but there is like sometimes those realization moments where it's like, yeah, that's just not healthy, or I actually do choose this person over that person, even if there's like some like leftovers. Um, I don't know. So I think it's true. It's like there's lots of little things, and it's also true. There's like some big moments that you might not even be able to like tell are happening sometimes.
Yeah, I mean, I really like your point, Janelle, that there is like baggage not just from former relationships. Like you could be a person who's never dated someone before, and you're still bringing the weight of life's experiences and
Mhm.
hurts and example from your parents and all of that into your future relationship. I was just trying to think through it personally, and I remember um, one of my last dating experiences in high school was with a girl who was unhealthy in a variety of ways. Specifically, when she was going through a slump emotionally, she would like take that out on people around her, including me as her boyfriend. So she would like be just really rude
Mhm.
and like kind of basically mean, like rude and mean. And then a few days later, she'd be like, "Hey, I'm sorry. I was PMSing, but I was suffering, and so I wanted you to suffer."
Mhm.
And
She almost like was sorry that it happened, but she still thought it was a legitimate way to act in the moment.
Yeah.
yeah,
Um, but unfortunate consequences instead of like,
Yeah.
I'm actually sorry. I
yeah,
shouldn't have done that.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I do remember a couple times, like when Janelle and I were dating a few years after this, of I would second guess things sometimes, like, oh, is this happening just because Janelle actually feels this way and she's saying she feels this way, or is there a subtext going on in another level? And Janelle's doing, like, not feeling well and taking it out on me, basically. So that was just like a personal example of like facing that baggage.
Mhm.
Um,
And at some point, there's probably a place where that stops. Where you like you stop and maybe you can't even like think about exactly where that spot is where you stopped making that comparison. But it was like a lot of little battles
yeah,
that kind of just like eventually went away. I
yeah,
don't know, hopefully.
yeah. No, it did. I think it's this interesting mix of Janelle being a healthier person in general, but then it also probably went away through talking about it, not just
Mm-hmm.
Janelle modeling something different.
Mm-hmm.
Of like, hey, is this going on? And Janelle kind of saying directly like, no, I wouldn't do that.
I can just imagine Janelle saying that it would be just like she'd be like, no.
Yeah,
That'd be exactly that'd be exactly how we would start.
yeah,
Why would you think that? That's
yeah, basically.
Yeah. I mean, I think just personality wise, this isn't like a virtue thing, but I tend to be like my emotions are on the front end. Like if I'm mad, you're gonna know that I'm mad, especially if you're my close person. Um, but I'm not gonna be rude to you because I'm mad.
yeah.
Like I'm not gonna hint that I'm mad by being
Yes.
rude. I just but you are gonna know it.
Yes.
So I think maybe eventually you came to understand like these are the emotions, and that doesn't necessarily
Yeah.
translate to treating you badly or trying to get you to suffer with me
Yeah.
or something.
So this isn't just true in relationships. It's true in our spiritual walk, our walk with Jesus too. So the theological connection I'd like for us to draw out is that all of us in our work to follow Jesus faithfully,
Mm-hmm.
we bring into that walk the emotional baggage from our lives, including our former relationships, but also, modeling. So we have the effects of sin, baggage from sinful choices we've made or patterns we've given into. We have wounds we've received from others, hurts from others. So if you like think about our journey with Jesus kind of idea, and then through the lens of Scott Pilgrim battling the
Yeah.
exes, like, do you see some similarities there of how we need to and can go to battle against former sins and present sins and wounds that can
Yeah.
trip us up?
I think it's actually interesting. So there's a book I read a while ago. It's like by some Christian counselors, but they said that they're like it's not a hard rule, but they said issues with your dad come up in relationship issues with the father.
Mm.
Issues with your mom or like mother figure is ends up with issues with the Holy Spirit.
Mm.
And then issues with friends and siblings usually end up with problems with Jesus.
Interesting.
And it's because the way that the Bible like portrays each of them relating to us is most similar to that relationship
Mm.
where like the father is the protector and the provider. And so if you weren't protected by your father as a child, you might not have a lot of problems with Jesus, but you could have a lot of problems. Or if you have like an angry father, you probably wouldn't have as many problems with Jesus. You might even be one of those people who's like, I love Jesus, I just don't like the father that much. Whereas like the Holy Spirit tends to speak in like the soft whisper. And they were like, yeah, which is one of the tactics of an unhealthy mom is manipulation and like emotional manipulation and like kind of like the feel bad for me or the I like and where it's like a lot more like subtle, but it's like going on and it's like a lot of people who have issues with the Holy Spirit, it's because they feel like they're being manipulated
Mm.
or they have like a pushback. As I said, they even say like it's not everybody, it's not like, but it's like the most obvious
Yeah, no,
relations.
that's really fascinating. That's like, um, I feel like everything you said so far is like almost like a diagnosis, though, like not a
Yeah.
treatment.
Oh yeah, yeah.
Do they give any advice for how to move through that, or is it
Yeah.
just time and
I think part of it they like say like you have to push into the one that you have trouble with.
okay?
And so it's like you can't improve your relationship with the Father by working on your relationship with Jesus.
Mm.
Because that's how in some ways I think that even goes back to like is it Marcionism? Where it's like the God of the Old Testament's not really God, it's only the God of the it's like the God of the Old Testament's angry and people can have that view of the Father. The father's the angry one. I just want to have a relationship with Jesus, and even like that weird like not scriptural thing of like the father like punished Jesus and like and Jesus jumped in the way because he's your friend like comes from that a little bit
Yeah.
where like you actually have to deal with the relationship with that one and not run away. And so it's like people who like don't feel good, or I think there's a lot of like the Holy Spirit doesn't really do anything anymore. Like a lot of that kind of stuff. It's like, no, the solution to that is pushing into relationship with the Holy Spirit.
Yeah.
So like for me, like I had some for some different reasons, like some trouble with the Father and emotionally relating to the Father. So for over a year, I addressed my prayers that I journal specifically to the Father.
Mm.
And kind of like just pushed into that and read passages specifically about the Father.
Mhm.
Um, I don't know. So I think it's kind of general, but it's like don't avoid the one that you have trouble with,
Yeah. Yeah.
or maybe you have trouble with multiple of the persons of the Trinity, but like don't avoid those in favor of the other ones, because that doesn't actually fix any of the problem.
Yeah. I think too, and I'm sure you did this as well, but I think it's this beautiful thing about the Christian faith that is not self-help. It's not all
Mm-hmm.
on your shoulders. Like you're invited to go to God and say,
Mm-hmm.
like, you know, God the Father, I want to be close to you. I know
Mm-hmm.
I'm not. I know I have some stuff in my past. Like, help me work through that.
Mm-hmm.
Help me have the kind of relationship with you that you want.
My thought on this a little bit is I think if you think of God as the pursuer
Mm-hmm.
and as like he's pursuing the hearts of people and like you're included. So it's almost like in the romantic sense, it's like Scott is the one interested in Ramona. He's like trying to
Mm-hmm.
pursue her and like he's willing to go through all of these obstacles of dealing with her stuff basically in order to pursue that relationship. And I just see that in us with God. Like God is like loving us and coming after us, and then we maybe have a struggle with a persistent sin or
Mm-hmm.
um some kind of issue that we're we're fighting against, and he's like, let me fight it with you
Mm-hmm.
and for you, like let me be part of this solution and don't try to just like run away.
Mm-hmm.
Like healing is going to be found together is almost
Yeah.
the picture.
Mm-hmm.
um and that he's that persistent pursuer that is gonna he's not gonna be like, what, you have another ex, well I'm out, you know. Like it's like almost like Scott is like, let's keep taking it on, I'll, you know,
Mm-hmm.
go for it. So that's where I
Okay.
saw.
I think the other thing that I've kind of been playing with the idea of, and it's probably because there's an old adage for like creative writing that's you write what you read. So for the last like few months, I've been reading one psalm every day, and then using that as like a jump into prayer.
Mhm.
But so I've started writing psalms. I don't know if they're very good, but I started writing them, and but kind of like this idea of like letting like expressing the issues to God
Mhm.
and then working through those in writing or in words. You know, like it's like yeah, like even just like writing like, hey God, I feel like this, and this. I feel, and the reason the Psalms are helpful is it kind of like pulls out and says like, oh, David had this problem, and you're like, me too, like, and so you can kind of like put words to it sometimes. But then like even in the writing of that, like you can like come to a place of like conclusion in that space where you kind of go like, hey God, this is the problem. I feel like you're scary. And then I probably shouldn't be scared of you because blah 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 blah.
Right.
Or like
Kind of the turn to truth
yeah,
in spite of what emotions are saying.
yeah.
Yeah. That's really good. I think it's a really great practice. So, moving on to relationships. The
I
movie,
start laughing.
I started laughing because I was like, how does the movie show good relationships? Well, not
It
that
it doesn't
much.
very
Yeah.
even here's the problem is that even like the whole time, and Ramona calls us out at one point. She says you're just another evil ex waiting to happen. And the point is that, and this is unfortunate, I think it's partly because it's a secular movie, is that there isn't a solution given. Though the solution is try harder.
Wow. Yeah.
And the problem is that some of the things that Scott and Ramona do in their dating process is not good.
Right.
Like he's bragging about getting to second base um on their like second date or their first date. It's like, yes, exactly. He is another evil ex waiting to happen because of what you guys are doing.
Right.
Um, and I think the movie calls out. what's unhealthy, but it doesn't actually have any solutions
Yeah.
for
It's
it.
just kind of like, this is how it works, so hopefully it works out for you.
Yeah, kind of.
Yeah. Yeah, so like, I mean, let's talk about that as a, just be honest that it's a negative example. But you can learn from negative examples too. So what does the movie teach us about maybe the importance of guarding our hearts, although I know some people are sick of that phrase. But guarding our hearts in romantic relationships. Where do Scott and Ramona fall short? Are there any lessons we can take away? Again, not saying they did it perfectly, but actually did it badly.
Hmm.
I mean, I think going back to what you said that Ramona says in the movie, where you're another, like, she's basically trying to break up with Scott
Yeah,
and like reject his pursuit.
yeah,
He's like, because she's cynical,
yeah.
because she's had so many bad experiences and, like brokenhearted experiences where they broke up. And so I think for relationships where you do have maybe a lot of history or like of previous broken relationships, I think you have to fight the cynicism and be
Hmm.
able to have some hope, you know,
Yeah, yeah.
that like I need to treat this relationship like it might be the one that lasts, in the sense of like investing in growing together
Hmm.
and working stuff out together and not just assume like, oh, I see something negative and therefore we're done here.
Hmm.
Um, yeah. I mean, my personal story is that I didn't date around much, but you did. So does that resonate?
Yeah, so I mean, I did have like lots of dating experiences, and a lot of them weren't really healthy or great. Some of them were fine. Um, but what I was thinking about is actually the whole, and you see this a lot in non-Christian movie shows, etc., where it's like the jump from interest to sex, or sexual things or physical intimacy. And I think the other part about like guarding your heart has to do with almost like realizing that there's multiple aspects to intimacy or closeness. And like the classic Christian advice is helpful, but I don't think it's enough to say like don't be too physically sexual, or right, like that's like but I think it's actually good to think through like all the aspects of closeness with someone, and in some ways like pace all of that.
Yeah.
Like there should be intellectual connection, there should be emotional
Mm.
connection, and there should be physical connection and spiritual.
Spiritual. Those are the
Sorry.
four that I
Yeah,
always go over.
yeah, 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 like, and there should be increasing closeness in all of those areas, and they should be like kind of relatively
Yeah, and
similar.
it's unhealthy if any of them outpace the others.
Yeah.
And we often see that in physical connection, that being the one that leads. But I think it can be unhealthy if physical is lagging behind. Or I think the one I've seen the most at Christian college was spiritual outpacing the
Mm,
others.
mm,
Like if you haven't held hands yet, it's probably not a good idea to be doing a personal one-on-one Bible study every week
mm,
where like he's leading you spiritually. You're probably not in that spot if you haven't held hands yet.
yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, and yet, I think as a response to don't go physically too fast, people are like, well, here's my deepest, darkest secret.
Yeah, I was gonna say emotional, I think
Yeah.
actually can outpace as
Yep.
well. Yeah.
Yeah. I actually think mental is maybe the one that lags behind the most.
Hmm. Yeah.
Which is also, honestly, besides spiritual, like one of the most important ones for like not being bored for your entire life in your marriage. Like, could you imagine getting married to someone and being like, I guess we should have conversations about things that we think now. Wow, this person has no insight on anything. Like, sorry, that's my worst nightmare. Like,
That's like literally what my dad chose my mom for. He
yeah,
was
I
like,
would, I
he
would
was
agree.
like, he's like, I can actually talk to you and
That's fair.
have
Yeah.
conversations.
But so kind of learning from the negative example, when I think about the movie and what's shown there, it's just kind of
Mhm.
like there's very few good conversations
Yeah.
between Ramona and Scott.
All
Yeah.
of the conversations, and this is a mistake people run into, is even all of the emotional conversations are about the relationship.
Yeah.
That doesn't really count
Yeah.
if you don't have like any of the other emotional conversations going on.
Yeah. Like, how are you doing? Let's talk
Well,
about it. Why?
one of the things I thought about with the movie is, so the story is that he basically is having dream, like she's his dream
Yeah.
girl, where he actually sees her in a dream.
Yeah.
and then he meets her the next day, and then later he sees her in a dream, and then
Yeah.
she's doing what he saw in the dream. But I think there's so not many people have an experience of like foreseeing
Yeah.
their,
Yeah.
future boyfriend or girlfriend in a dream. But I do think there's something there about like the mysticism element that some people bring to relationships where they're like, and I think this can maybe be especially true for like first time relationships, but you're like, I feel a fluttery feeling, and now I know that this needs to be my guiding
This
light.
is the solution.
Yeah,
Yeah.
instead of it being like, I don't know. And I know that different people have different relationship experiences. Like there are people who see someone from across the room in a crowd of people and they're like, I'm going to marry that person.
Hmm.
And that's their experience and that's legit for them. But as like a general like guideline, I would say like be friends first or like like
Yeah.
don't like just dive in. Or I'd also say like don't be led too much by those mystical signs that some people go after
Right.
with relationships, and actually connect as a person with
Yeah.
them and be
Yeah.
attracted to them as a person, not just yeah.
And I always kind of like I personally I hear like the be friends first, and I think a lot of people have the experience of like we were friends before we started dating, which I think is a great thing. But I don't think that's the entirety or the full meaning of be friends first. I think a lot of like the be friends first is like even if like you meet by going on a date, like you're building a foundation of friendship
Yeah, care
on these dates.
holistically, I would
Yeah,
say. Care
care. Yeah,
holistically
yeah,
about them as a
yeah.
person.
And it's like you're not. It's not like when you're dating someone, you shouldn't be like if they wouldn't be your friend. Like if you like if you're like dating someone and you're like, wow, I really like this person romantically, but I would never hang out with this person.
Yeah, that's a
Then
big
that's not
warning
being
flag.
friends. Like you should be friends as you're doing all that stuff, right? Um,
That's
yeah.
really good. All right. So, in the movie, they do this very stylized, graphic, comic book like fight scenes. That's how Scott goes after. And I do have to admit, like, there's a draw towards that, right? Like,
Hmm.
the popularity of video games, comic books, action movies, superhero movies, where there is something like, I don't know, like, enjoyable or pleasing about, like, a physical thing to fight.
Hmm.
And then I think that's interesting to like take that almost like draw that we experience and then look at like what Paul says in Ephesians 6 about like there actually is a fight. There
Hmm.
is a real war,
Hmm.
but it's not physical, but it is
Yeah.
against the spiritual forces of evil.
Yeah.
And so go to battle. Like there is a real battle to be fought.
Yeah. Well, I think one of the funniest things about like the fights is that they all end with change getting
Mm,
spread around. And eventually that change earns him an extra life, like kind of like a second chance in the relationship. But also what's funny about it is like the first one, he like the poofs the first evil ex-boyfriend he was from like sixth grade or something. And he's like I love the line because he goes, "Oh, coins." And he like starts to pick them up immediately. And then he's like, "That's not enough for bus fare." And it's like even in like some of the early batters, it's like you're earning, but you're not earning a lot in the beginning parts of a relationship. You're not earning a lot of credit
mm,
because you're doing the small things that everybody can do
yeah.
in that relationship. Anyways, I just
Mm.
thought that was like kind of a funny,
No,
like
that's cool, dude.
you like see, but like in the same way, it's like you see your progress.
Yeah.
In some,
Yeah.
I see the points go up on the screen.
Right.
I see my progress. I now have more of this.
Mm.
Where in like in real life, it's a lot more ethereal.
Yeah. Yeah, I think what I was thinking about is like it's like a fun visual like the concept of the movie is like this fun visualization of battling emotional baggage
Yeah,
with physical fights.
yeah.
And I was just trying to play with like could we connect that for Christians to like fighting against various types of sin
Mm,
or spiritual forces of
yeah,
evil and like could you I don't know
Gamify it.
yeah gamify
yeah.
spiritual warfare in
One,
some
there's
ways.
also like the weird thing of like I think this is especially true for the second fight, which is against Chris Evans and all his stunt
Yeah.
doubles. Um, is he gets hit by a skateboard in the face like 30,000 times and like kicked like 10,000 times in this battle. Like he's getting like just the snot beat out of him. And it becomes a lot less fun as soon as you go, wow, each one of those is like an unfun conversation that he had with his girlfriend
Mm.
where he was compared negatively to someone in the past. It's like, wow, this fight sucks. Like, like it is not a fun relationship dynamic that's going on right now.
Yeah.
Um, I don't know. It's like
Yeah.
even like in sin, it's like every time you're like in this battle, you're like, wow, each one of these hits is really unfun.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's really fun to be the person or to be in that position of like the fighting back. And maybe that's maybe a little bit of like the potential like um what's the word like application is like
Mm.
is it's a lot more fun to be the person who's making inroads against sin
Okay.
than to be the person who's resisting sin.
Mm. Yeah.
Resisting sin and getting like kicked but not falling down, there is no fun part of that.
Yeah.
But having like conquering or beating certain parts of like of certain sins is like it is encouraging and I don't know.
Yeah.
Mm.
No, that's a good point. And actually related to that, Jake, I have felt personally like a sense of strength or resoluteness, I want to say, when I'm being tempted and there's like that clarity moment of like this might not be simply me and my
Mm-hmm.
own temptations or my own
Mm-hmm.
flesh. Like there could be something demonic right now going on.
Mm-hmm.
And there is something like I'm not like gonna let you
Yeah.
like have your way with
Manipulate
me,
me.
manipulate me. Like I'm standing up against you. Like I don't know. For some
Yeah.
reason, it just feels different when
Yeah.
it's like, oh, I suck that I'm tempted to do this versus
Yeah.
like there's something external going
Yeah.
on.
No, John Eldridge talks about that a lot in some of his books, but there was like one where he was talking about like as he's like started working on writing more, he was talking about like one of the first books he was working on, and he was like, and there were days where my mind was cloudy and like I couldn't find my pen, and like he was like, there was one day I looked for like 14 or 15 minutes for my pen because I had this like insatiable desire to like find my pen and like I couldn't, and I was like praying to God about it, and God was like, this is gonna be a sucky day for writing and you should put in just as much time into writing today
Hmm.
because I'm going to let Satan like try to stop you because it's going to build you for the future in your writing. And he was like, well, this is going to be a sucky day. Like, but there's like that level of like,
Yeah.
in the days that it sucks the most, it's like the most of like, well, this will make other days not suck nearly as bad. I
Mhm.
don't know. Like,
Mm.
Yeah.
sorry, what were you going to say, Janelle?
I don't remember.
Oh,
No,
sorry.
it's fine.
So,
Oh, I remember now.
oh, go ahead.
So I was gonna say, I think one of the, because I have heard people talk sometimes about spiritual things as like, we're gonna give the old 1-2 to Satan, and I don't resonate with that. But I think part of it is I think there's always a danger in the Christian life of success leading to pride
Mhm.
and pride leading to the fall. You know, so
Yeah.
it's like, um, how can we make sure that we keep Jesus at the center as the hero and not try to put ourselves in that position of like, I'm so good because I don't do that anymore, or I
Yeah.
conquered this or that, you know, like,
Yeah.
because I do feel like that's like the classic Pharisaical
Yeah.
downfall is being like, well, I'm spiritual, I'm good, so therefore I'm better than all you people, and
Mhm.
I don't need God really because I'm doing it on my own.
Yeah.
So yeah,
So that's a good point. I mean, going back to that spiritual warfare passage, I had the privilege of preaching on that a few months ago, and in my research, I was like, I hadn't heard this before, but it's it's the Lord's armor. Like the armor that Paul goes through is related
Mhm.
to these prophecies in Isaiah, but they're describing that the armor that the Son or the Messiah will put on. Like so,
it's like he's lending you
he's
his.
lending you his stuff. Like it's not like
Mm.
oh, good job fighting. It's like good job clothing yourselves
Mhm.
in Him and His protection and His strength.
Mhm.
Where when you understand it correctly, I think it should
Keep you humble.
keep you humble.
One like maybe there's like some aspect of like God is helping us fight our battles a lot of the time. And maybe it's like okay, I'm gonna use a football analogy, and I'm not that big on football, but I think it works. So in football you have five offensive linemen,
Mhm.
and then you have like a certain amount of rushers. Sometimes they rush as little as three people and as many as eight people, and like your five offensive linemen have to deal with those people. But there are like really good people who are like really good rushers who are trying to get to the quarterback can draw like two or three people to have to go against them. And in some sense, in a lot of our battles, we're like the offensive line, or like we're like the edge rushers going at the offensive line, right? And God is like so good that like four of the offensive linemen are dealing with him, and then it's like the other four of you just go for it, like we're like going for it. It's like, wow, this is hard, but like we're doing it. And then like sometimes we're like, well, I can do it on my own, and then God is like, well, maybe I'll go into coverage and I'll let you deal with all the rushing yourself. And then we get like flattened, and it's like, where it's like God like takes a lot more of the battle than we see. And then we go, I'm so awesome. I'm using this armor so good. Like, let me have it all. And it's like, that's not gonna work. Like, and God's like, sure.
Yeah, but it's not gonna go well for you.
Yeah. Anyways, football analogy.
Oh, that's good. All right. Any last personal takeaways before we close in prayer and talk about what we're going to cover on our next episode?
I think for me is like in the aspect of guarding your heart, which I feel is a weird terminology, and honestly I'm not even sure it like works that well biblically with like the verses that it references. But whatever. I was looking at it the other day for my series on dating and decided not to use it because I wasn't convinced. But like it is important to guard your heart in general. But it's like whether it be about relationships or about past hurts or about like literally anything, to look at the past with real eyes, or like with your actual eyes, and not with like the rose colored glasses kind of idea. And to have a sober view of the past, maybe is a good way to put it, instead of an idyllic view of the past. um and not to, and maybe this is like regardless of if it's positive or negative, not to compare the present to the past, because generally you'll just end up really disliking one of them. You know what I mean? Like, I don't know, that would be my
Yeah. For me, I think of just the importance of selflessness in dating relationships, in all relationships really, but like it comes through in this movie, in that if you think about like the emotional baggage that Ramona has, and even you find out eventually that Scott is giving to like Knives, for example,
and that he has.
and that he has, it's almost all like rooted in like this selfishness and approach to dating relationships, and like what you can get out of it, and then just dropping the people, and even when you drop people, doing it in the easiest way possible for you, at least, and just like having that mindset, of like almost like the golden rule perspective of
Yeah.
like how would I, want, um how would I want to be treated, basically, like
Yeah.
if it doesn't work out, or if it does. And like the healthier you are in a relationship, the less baggage you will have, but also more like the less baggage you'll be giving to them,
Yeah.
that they'll be bringing forward.
It's like sorry, there's like so many like funny small parts in the movie, but there's this part where like he's talking to his sister about like wanting to go out with Ramona Flowers, and his older sister is like, no, you can't do that, like you're not nice to like people, and like you need to like work on yourself first. He's like, no, 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 it's fine, I'm great. And then she's like, what about this person? And he's like, they're fine. She's like, what about this person? And he's like, they're fine. He goes, what about Kim, which is the drummer for their band? And he goes, that was nothing. Kim doesn't even remember it. And then you see like in the background, it like zooms in on Kim like staring at him. And it's like, oh, you don't, like when you're self-focused, you don't even realize.
Yeah. He's like oblivious to the damage.
Yeah, to this person that's in his band who probably still wants to go out with him.
Mm.
And
There's still drama there that he
just like brushes aside because he doesn't feel it.
Yeah. It's interesting. It's good. It's been a great conversation. We're going to pick it up here in 2 weeks. When we come back, we're going to talk about the other aspects of the film, specifically the final battle where Scott loses and then wins because he stops fighting for Ramona. He starts fighting for something else. So we're going to talk about the importance of self-respect and some other things. But for now, let me close this in prayer. God, thank you for this time together to talk about this quirky movie. I do pray, though, that all of us would consider how our actions, how we relate to others, both in dating relationships and apart from that, how we can be working for the good of others, like helping people get rid of their baggage, basically, or negatively, like we don't want to be contributors to the emotional baggage that others carry through life. So help us to be sensitive and selfless, and as we engage with the battle against sin. Help us to look to you for strength and experience victory there, but not victory that leads to pride. We ask these things in your name, Jesus. Amen.
Amen.